Welcome to the Problematic FMC podcast. This show is for the reader who has thrown her Kindle against the wall, then immediately picked it up and apologized to the characters in the book. For the reader who's frustrated with seeing the same 10 books posted on Bookstagram and Book Talk. But can you really blame them when you're currently rereading your comfort book for the 10th time? And most importantly, this show is for the reader who completely denounces any expectations of what it means to be a serious or sophisticated reader. We're all just here to have some fictional fun. Let's get started with the show. I am going to start the episode by just sharing a little bit about myself. I'm going to start with my reading origin story and how I even got into books. So I'm going to go all the way back to 5th grade when a good friend, shout out Shelby, gave me Twilight, the first book of the Twilight saga. And I remember I started reading it when I went with my family on vacation, and I remember that vacation, and I remember it was the first time in my life that I was so addicted to a book, and it was the first time in my life that I remember still thinking about the book when I was not reading the book. And it was just such a great experience. I remember thinking, wow, like I didn't know that a book could be this much fun. And then I started reading a lot more. This was like 2005 to 2008, like the Hunger Games time and all those dystopian YA fantasy books. And so I kept reading, and I always considered myself a reader, but my reading did take a little bit of a backseat during high school and college as I got busy. I did continue to read through that time. I remember in college, I remember reading the Selection series. And I remember thinking to myself, oh yeah, like I forgot that reading could be fun. Like I've been doing all of this reading for school, and I forgot that like how much joy a fun, mindless, and I don't say that in any kind of derogatory way, just like a true fluffy plot-driven book, how much that can really add to your life. And so I was reading kind of sporadically off and on throughout this college period. And then I remember the last day of college, I literally turned in my last assignment, and my reward to myself was I went to Barnes & Noble and gave myself a huge book haul. This was in 2019, and I think you can see where this is going. So I'm reading a little bit more. By a little bit more, I mean I'm on track to read like 10 to 20 books per year. And then, of course, March of 2020 hits. The pandemic absolutely exploded my reading. I went from that 10 to 20 books a year to 50 plus books a year. And during this time, I really started experimenting and putting my finger on the pulse of exactly what books I like to read, what genres kind of don't work for me. And I also, a few years after that, started listening to audiobooks. And so I went from this like 50-ish books a year, only physically reading books, like maybe sometimes reading on my Kindle too, but I had never really listened to an audiobook before. And then all of a sudden I get into that world and I'm doubling the number of books that I'm consuming. And that just turned into a huge exploration of tons of different genres, tons of different authors that I previously hadn't been exposed to. And it was during this time that I started consuming Bookstagram and Book Talk content. And so I was getting lots of new book recommendations. I was expanding the types of book podcasts that I was reading. I was just trying a lot of different things and really getting a better read on what I like to read. And so in May of 2022, it was May 10th of 2022 that I decided to start my Bookstagram again. I had been consuming the Bookstagram content for a while, and I thought there's no reason that I can't do that. Like, it looks so fun. I just really wanted to find community with readers who like the same types of books as me, and it was the first time that I kind of realized that there was an online community that was into the same kinds of things that I was. And I got into it, and I just really found that I love the creative outlet. I mean, I love pairing books together and finding that aesthetic picture and I really like the short form review, but I don't know that Bookstagram is the best place as someone who's sometimes looking for new book recommendations, I'm not sure that Bookstagram is the best place to find those recommendations for me. If I'm taking something from Bookstagram, it's usually not from a single creator. It's a book that I've seen many creators share over a long period of time. But I did decide that I want to start this podcast. The main reason being I'm a huge consumer of bookish podcasts. Some of my favorite shows are currently reading What Should I Read Next, Miss Willa's Book Club, I'll Read What She's Reading podcasts. There's tons that I listen to weekly that I could name here. I absolutely love bookish podcasts. However, I'm always really hesitant to try new shows because something about me as a reader is I really like to go into books blind. And a lot of commentators give more information about books when they're setting books up than I'd prefer. I really like the currently reading style of sharing a book, it being completely non-spoilery. But, sometimes like trigger warnings can spoil a book. Sometimes, and I do think that trigger warnings have value, and I think saying, hey, be aware of trigger warnings, go check Storygraph or whatever your source may be. Another thing is I rarely add books to my TBR from a podcast unless I know the creator and I know their taste, but that's actually kind of rare. Honestly, out of all of the book podcasts that I listen to, there's really only one person who I've found is quote unquote my book twin. And I think that's Sarah from Reading Through Life. And unfortunately, they're not even releasing their podcast episodes anymore. So out of all of these podcasts that I listen to and love, there's not really one person that I trust as a source of, if they love this book, then I'll probably love it too. And so that's really made me stop and think about, if I was to do a bookish podcast, how would I talk about books? And I kind of want to do it a little bit differently. And so I've decided that the format of these episodes, I will share books that I've finished lately, but it will always be 100% non-spoilery. I will err on the side of sharing less information, not more. Again, because I like to go into books very blind. I don't want to share information beyond what you could get from the back jacket copy or from the first few chapters of the book. So just a very brief synopsis. When I'm doing reviews on Bookstagram or on Goodreads, I'm usually focusing more on the types of readers who will enjoy the book more than what's actually happening in the book, because again, I don't want to give anything away. So this book is great for fans of this other book, and sharing comps I think is a great strategy, or fans of the friends to lovers trope, as long as that's not spoilery or anything, kind of depending on the book and what people are expecting before they've come to my podcast. Another thing about me as a reviewer is I actually don't like to share my ratings, because I believe that my ratings say very little about how a different reader will enjoy the book, because you're different from me. Like, you and me could give a book the exact same rating but have very different reasons, or we all just have different lived experiences that we bring into that story that could make us experience that book differently. And it's also true that I myself might rate something differently if I read it at a different time or in a different format. So if I listened to it, maybe I would have rated it higher if I would have read it on my Kindle, or vice versa. That is a topic that will take up an entire episode, because I have a lot of thoughts on that. So with all that in mind, I want to just dive into what I've read lately in light of this kind of non-spoilery format. So the first book I'm going to share is Golden Girl by Ellen Hildebrand. A brief synopsis. A mother of 3 grown children is killed in a hit-and-run accident. She goes to the beyond, where she's given 3 nudges to influence life on Earth. So she's given 3 opportunities to kind of change the course of events. And her kids will need these nudges as they deal with the grief of her death, as they deal with trying to solve the murder case, as they navigate scandals in their own love lives, and all of the messy family drama. For me, this was my first Ellen Hildebrand book, but I definitely would be interested in picking up more, maybe like one a summer. It has all the summer vibes. And I love that it had a very simple plot that was easy for my brain to keep straight. I listened to it while I was on vacation. So while I was on the plane, while I was packing and doing different things, I just had it in my ears and I had no problem following the story. So this book is 384 pages. It was published in 2021. Out of the 150,000 ratings that it has on Goodreads, it has an average of 4.17 stars. Again, that was Golden Girl by Ellen Hildebrand. The next book that I have read and really, really enjoyed lately is I read Wild at Heart and Forever Wild. This is books 2 and 3 of the Wild series by K.A. Tucker. Brief synopsis, I'll just give kind of a summary of the first book or a setup of the first book. After Calla loses her job in metropolitan Toronto, she receives a phone call from a friend of her estranged father's asking for her to come meet him in Alaska, where he has lived and run his Bush pilot plane company for her entire life. And she is deciding that she has nothing left to lose in Toronto. She flies across the continent to meet with him, and she struggles to navigate rebuilding a relationship with him after being estranged from him for many, many years. And maybe, just maybe, she finds love along the way. So I actually had the pleasure of reading these books while I was in Alaska. For the parts that I was able to experience, K.A. Tucker really captures the beauty of the land, but also the challenges of the people who lived there. This book is so much more than a romance. Again, it is a 4-book series following the same character, so it's not a traditional plot arc of the romance. And I just found it very emotionally compelling. I really, really enjoyed it. And I have the next book in my queue. Very, very excited to read the 4th of this, again, 4-book series. The 3rd book is a novella, so it's a little bit shorter, but the rest of them are all 300 to 400 pages, published from 2018 to 2022. The first book has 127,000 ratings on Goodreads with an average of 4.16 stars, and the next books, as series do. Again, that was Wild at Heart and Forever Wild, books 2 and 3 in the Wild series by K.A. Tucker. And the 3rd book that I am sharing today is Here One Moment by Liane Moriarty. A seemingly ordinary woman boards a flight. If it was not for what she'd done, no one would have ever remembered seeing her. She was nicely dressed, if unremarkable, but after she stood up halfway through the flight, she came to be known as the Death Lady. I would recommend going into this book as blind as possible. Do not read the cover copy. Do not read the summary on Goodreads or Amazon. They give way too much away. Liane Moriarty is an auto-buy author for me, so I didn't even know that going into it. That was absolutely the right move. And this is one of her best books yet. And that's really saying something because I've loved a lot that I've read from her. She is an absolute master at domestic suspense, dark humor, and complex, deeply human characters. The story dives into grief, family drama, and a silly little plane ride that had me gasping. I will tell you, the plane doesn't blow up. She doesn't pull a gun. It's nothing like that. How she came up with this concept is... I seriously wonder where this came from. I'd love to maybe see an interview where she talks about that. Thank you to NetGalley and Crown Publishing for the advanced copy of this book. It is 512 pages, publishing September 10th of 2024. And out of the 1,000 or so Goodreads ratings to date, there is an average of 4.16 stars. Again, I super loved this one. It was Here One Moment by Liane Moriarty. So that's just a little bit of a taste of me sharing my current reads. So my plan for each episode is to share my current reads in that format and then also to cover a topic about the bookish life. So these could be things like publishing industry news. Some topics that I have in mind relating to that are indie versus traditional publishing, some authors that maybe you didn't know started off as independently published, maybe trends in topics or genres in the publishing industry. And of course, as a bookstagrammer, I'm super interested in the impact of social media, of both Bookstagram and Book Talk, on people's consumption of reading on what types of books become popular and how people talk about books. I'm also just interested in topics about the bookish life. So like, how are we tracking our reading, the psychology behind how you organize your books? And I'm also interested, once I figure out some logistical things, in interviewing other bookish creators. I also wanted to address the title of the show. Why did I choose the name Problematic FMC? So this is something that I've seen a lot in reviews and also just conversations around books, that a lot of readers just can't stand for female characters to have moral struggles or to sometimes make questionable decisions. I, as a reader, absolutely love that, and I want to see all elements of the female experience portrayed on the page. I absolutely hate the trope of the woman who has the moral high ground. We see this a lot in romance, where she makes all the right decisions and she's been in therapy and she's worked on herself. And, you see it a lot with like the grumpy sunshine trope. Well, I want the trope where she's grumpy and he's sunshine. Like, I want to see a woman going through it and then coming out on the other side of it. And I don't mind. Like, I don't need to agree with all of her decisions. I love flawed female characters because they're relatable, because I can see myself in them. And sometimes that doesn't mean that I would agree with their decisions, but that doesn't mean that they're not redeemable. And I think you'll see as a theme as I review books is that when a character finds redemption, that is so compelling to me. I call these like the Nesta type characters, Nesta being one of the characters from A Court of Thorns and Roses, the 5th book in the series. A Court of Silver Flames completely focused on her, and a lot of people hated that book because they just couldn't handle a character who sometimes made some bad decisions. And people online that are hating these Nesta type characters, I'm reading that and I'm like, well, you're hating on me as a person because I'm problematic, because we're all problematic. And so I think any kind of self-aware reader will come into those characters and say, okay, I've never dealt with that particular struggle, but I can have compassion, or I can see how she got to that place, or I can at least be open-minded enough to learn her backstory to find out why she might have made that decision. I also chose the name Problematic FMC in relation to a lot of the conversations online. There are so many issues that I wish the average bookish influencer thought further into. As a woman online in a pretty female-dominated space, I sometimes feel non-conforming. And when I say non-conforming, I don't necessarily mean controversial. I think if I was to sit down with most of the people who are saying things that I, on the surface, disagree with, I think as we talk through the issue, I think we would probably agree. I just mean that sometimes my opinions are more nuanced and sometimes even open-ended than what I'm seeing represented online. And that's another thing that our culture as a whole, even beyond bookish people, I don't think we do very well with, and that is admitting that maybe at the moment we don't have enough information to form a complete opinion. Our culture as a whole really doesn't think beyond a headline. I think that readers should be better. After all, readers are the people who should be the most curious and the most willing to dive deep into an issue. And so that is why I am doing a podcast being a longer form medium where I can take the time to kind of dive deep into multiple sides of an issue. And it's also a challenge for me to force myself to research the topics and think more deeply and hold all of my opinions with an open hand. So as I'm diving into topics, it'll just be an opportunity to explore more about why we read what we read, what are we looking for out of the reading life, and how do we communicate with each other in a space when maybe sometimes we don't agree. Some lighter fun facts about me. Fun fact number 1, I'm a Christian. This does definitely impact the content of things that I'm reading. I love a good versus evil storyline, but again, I don't want my characters to be flat. I love a good character who sometimes struggles, or an evil character who maybe sort of has a reason to be evil. I mean, I'm okay with a little bit of that tension. But watching good triumph over evil, it's universal. We all love, good winning in the end. Again, with being a Christian, I think just like with any person of any religious or non-religious background, there are some topics that I just don't prefer. So for me, any kind of romanticizing of demons, I'm usually going to shy away from. Also, children being harmed, just not for me. Those are things that I won't really disparage on the show, because I won't really be bringing those types of books to the show, because I've just learned I'm going to stay away from those books. I never hesitate to share that I'm a Christian, because it's such a huge part of me and my life, but I do always hesitate a little bit with how to share it in secular spaces, because I don't want people to hear that I'm a Christian and immediately say, oh my gosh, she's judging what I read. I can promise you I am not. That is not for me to do. I don't know you. And if there is one thing that I know about this reading life, it's that different topics impact people differently. I'm sure that I'll probably do like an episode that deep dives into trigger warnings and different things like that. But the truth is, like, every person responds to different things differently. And so something that might not work for me might work absolutely fine for you, and vice versa. I mean, there are Christians out there who would say Twilight is not edifying and that we shouldn't be reading it. Then again, there are solid, biblically informed Christian women who read nothing but hardcore erotica. And I definitely don't shy away from spicy books, but some of what they read would offend my sweet little sensibilities. And so, it's a spectrum, and what works for me might not work for you. And this is not at all a space to judge what anyone's reading. I think it does more so impact the themes that I'm looking for. Fun fact number 2, I have a corgi named Lou. This doesn't really impact the content of what I read, but she's almost always by my side when I'm reading. She's my little bud, and so sometimes when I'm recording, you might hear some little tippy tappies. That's Lou. Another fun fact about me, I actually work full-time as an e-learning designer. I do work 8 to 5, and so this does impact the content of what I read, in that some of my nonfiction selections are focused on education or professional development, and I might bring some of those to the show, depending on how universal I think, or if they might be relevant to a wider audience. But this also impacts the content of what I read, in that I'm using my brain during the bulk of my day. And when I sit down at the end of the day, I just want to be entertained. I want a fun story. If it's not holding my attention, I'm usually going to put it away, or I'm not even going to select that book. I just really want something that is fun. Another fun fact about me is I love the show Big Brother. I love all game type reality shows, but something about Big Brother with the strategy and the scheming and the alliances, and I really see this reflected in what I read. I love a book with any kind of game element. So like The Hunger Games was the perfect book, right? Any kind of game element, it's a great mechanism for adding suspense. I mean, one thing that I've learned about me, and I'm sure will become a theme as I'm reviewing books, is that I love for there to be a central question that needs to be addressed throughout the plot of the book. You can have subplots, you can have complications that get in the way of answering that central question, but I want a character that is at point A, they need to get to point B, and we know what point B is, but we don't know how they're going to get there. That is the most compelling type of book for me, and I think any kind of game element makes that really easy for the author to do. I also just love strategy, and I love watching clever characters. Political machinations are kind of another way that this manifests, and it works really well for me. Like royal siblings scheming against each other to steal their father's crown or something. I love it. That is absolute. I will eat that up every single time. So there's some fun facts about me and how that kind of impacts my reading life. The last thing that I wanted to do is just a fun little segment that I was going to do. If you've been following me on Bookstagram for any amount of time, you know that I'm a fan of a good old would you rather question. So I'm going to share the question, I'm going to share what I would answer, and then I want you to head on over to my Instagram account at Problematic FMC, and I want you to tell me which one you would choose. So this week's question is for the Steve Carell fans. Would you rather have Michael Scott from The Office narrate all of your audiobooks or Gru from Despicable Me? And yes, they can stop the narrative to commentate their own thoughts. Which one would you choose? I think I'm going to choose Michael Scott. I think of the two, he has the less distracting voice. Man, there would be a lot of commentary though. But his commentary would be like mundane, right? And not like taking over the world. I don't know. Both would be difficult to listen to, but I think I'm going to choose Michael Scott. So go let me know which one you would choose. That is all for this week. If you like this episode, please give me some 5-star love and maybe share with a friend. And head on over to my Instagram at Problematic FMC. Give me a follow and let me know which would you rather. Until next time, keep flipping those pages. Bye.